what's happened with responsible tourism over the last 20 years. Mike, it seems incredible to me that you and I ran that conference back in 2002. The conference was run alongside the World Summit on Sustainable Development, as a consequence of which it got a lot more profile than it might otherwise have got. We've run about 15 conferences since. The 15th was to be 2 years ago in Finland. Obviously that's been delayed, but I am keen to continue to run conferences in destinations to try and encourage the process of change. Mike, you were heavily involved, as I remember our conversations at the time, in the 1996 white paper.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain something about that and where the impetus for the white paper came from?
Yeah, I'll just, this is this is historic, or it's history really. But, we had the transition period from into the new democracy, and during that period we had the organization called SATTWA at that time, the precursor to South African tourism. And at that stage we were very much into what we called ecotourism, and it was almost like a new concept for South Africa, looking at this balancing act of economy, environment, and social issues. So it was very opportune when the new policy was produced after 1994. We had a very good facilitator in Dr. Aliana Poon, who came out here to South Africa, had lots of workshops, and I was appointed as head of the National Tourism Department at that stage. And I remember delivering to the cabinet this policy, which was really saying we're entering a new era, and it's all about the benefit of tourism being conveyed and being shown to the people of South Africa. So many people were excluded from tourism in the past. So at that particular stage, there was a lot of enthusiasm for the concept of responsible tourism. The principles that are embodied in responsible tourism still until today have not changed, and I think that's why our policies have not really changed. The white paper on tourism is actually cited throughout the world as wherever I move, and I'm now working internationally. I've worked in 30, 40 countries internationally through my consultancy career, and everywhere the white paper on tourism of South Africa is cited as one of the best tourism policies globally. I'm sad to say that unfortunately I don't see enough of that currently in the way that we are managing tourism in South Africa, both at a local level, at a local government level, but also at a national government level. We've sort of lost that enthusiasm. We've lost that thrust of a bigger vision for tourism. And I think it's become something a lot more opportunistic at the moment. Tourism is being thrown around. And the vision that we had at that particular stage, and I would say for the next 10 years after 1994, was so exciting. And we were all so much into it. And maybe there's an opportunity. There's a new opportunity for bringing tourism back into the arena of being a mainstream factor and a pillar of economic development and social development in our democracy and in our economy.
I think I would agree with you about that, Mike. I think one of the things that COVID has done is to bring to the fore again people's doubts about international travel particularly, but also about domestic travel. That sense you need to be able to trust the accommodation you're going to, and you also need to be able to trust the community you're going to. So people have watched what's happened in America, where people have refused to wear masks. And certainly some of my friends, and I feel this as well, I don't want to risk going to visit a country where people are so casual about the health of other people. One of the pleasures of being in South Africa is that the mask wearing compliance is much more than it actually is in London at the moment. And that makes me feel comfortable about being here. And I think it's that notion of trust which lies at the heart of responsibility. And Radisson, I would single out as probably the international business which has done most with that concept to demonstrate that you can trust to stay at the Radisson and they'll look after you. The other thing we're seeing, and we'll come back to this later I think on another panel about resilience, is we're seeing more and more people booking direct with the accommodation they're going to go to. They're not trusting the OTA because they want to deal directly with the people who are going to be looking after them and looking after their health. And I think this is, as you're saying, Mike, I think this is a big opportunity to change the dynamic and the direction of travel again in South Africa, but around the world.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think there is an opportunity. I just find that, when we speak about responsible tourism, and even this morning, we're sort of on the edges, we're on the fringes. The mainstream of tourism shifting millions of people. If I look at projects where I worked in the last 2 years, currently we're working on Egypt, on a master plan for Egypt. The Red Sea environment, for example, they are caught in this dilemma of a low value, a very high volume of tourism. I look at island destinations where I work, Zanzibar, even Nosy Be, Madagascar, St. Lucia in the Caribbean. These all-inclusive big operators are ring-fencing visitors into resorts, and they're providing that sort of trustworthy environment. But there are walls around these places, and the broader community out there are not really seeing the benefits always of the mainstream of tourism. So I think there's a big message that needs to go to the consumer more and more. And you're so right, Harold, in what you're saying, that in the end, it's going to be the pressure also from the consumer side. It's not only the operators respond to what the consumers want. And there's a new thrust required, and this is the opportune time, post-COVID. I totally agree with you that there's a new awareness and there's a new value system evolving in travel.
Mike, I lost track of the number of business people in South Africa who told me that this white paper wouldn't last. One person after another said, oh, don't worry about that, we'll get a new policy soon.
Yeah.
The reality is, it's still here. 1996, it's probably the longest running tourism policy in the world. And I think the reason for that is it still speaks to the urgent priorities in South Africa. And that, I've deliberately taken some direct quotes from the policy. Responsible tourism, it said in 1996, is not a luxury for South Africa, but an absolute necessity if the country is to build a successful and sustainable tourism industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's still true.
Totally true. It's even more true today than what it was at that time, and it remains very true. As I've said, I think, and it came out this morning as well, government leadership and the vision for tourism is really the catalyst, for private sector. There are people like Michael Lutzaier and others who have taken this on board and who have made it their brand. But South Africa, also our brand was built around this. There was so much enthusiasm from operators across the world for this new vision of tourism in South Africa. In a way, as I say, I think the main thing is that we are really in need of building on this policy in terms of a vision moving forward and picking it up in terms of combining the energy of the public and the private sector. Michael this morning mentioned the notion of having a new sort of discussion. You called it a conference, whatever it is, but a discussion to bring public and private sector together. I would like to see the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, SATSA, the tourism bodies, being much more vocal about the concept of responsible tourism and sustainability in tourism. We don't hear enough about it. It's sort of under the surface.
The real irony in all of this is that I was so excited by what came out of South Africa with that white paper that I went to the Department for International Development and asked them to give me some money so that I could come over to South Africa and work in South Africa with businesses and with government to develop what became the South African Guidelines for Responsible Tourism, which have almost disappeared. I've still got a stock at home, but you never see this anymore. The reality is that I looked at these recently for some work I'm doing in India. Nothing much has changed. We knew 20 years ago what needed to be done. And I'd be the first to say there's nothing in this document. I wrote it, but it was based on copying and stealing from everybody else, which is precisely the idea that lies behind the platform for change. We need to share those ideas which have worked. And sadly, still, there's a reluctance to take responsibility and take the action, which I think, Mike, leads us on to the second thing you and I wanted to discuss, which is how we get people to take responsibility and make change.
Yeah, I think that, that is the big question. How do we actually energize this? And I think the notion of, on the one hand, having a business case for responsible tourism is very important. But from my perspective, I think it sits a lot with the consumer and with the user of tourism. A lot of the debate has been around businesses and the way we operate and the way that businesses operate, accreditation systems and so on. But in terms of communication, really getting the message out to the user out there, to the traveler, that you can make a difference in this world, by traveling responsibly and the way that you travel. People who go to places on all-inclusive packages, for example, and almost have the blinkers on in terms of how businesses are operating and what they are leaving behind and what the impact is in terms of job creation, value chain, lengthening of the value chain and so on. That needs to change. And if the bigger operators can all bring on board in terms of the overall branding and the overall marketing, the concepts of responsible tourism, maybe that's where the thrust should be, the next thrust should be. Responsible traveler rather than only responsible tourism, responsible travel, let's call it responsible travel as a concept.
I co-founded responsibletravel.com with a former student of mine, Justin Francis. And I sold my shares, paid off my mortgage, because there was a potential conflict of interest in me doing the kind of consultancy work I was doing, which is very similar to what you now do, Mike. So I sold up and left that business. I now very much regret it, because immediately before COVID, responsibletravel.com was growing at nearly 60% a year.
Yeah.
Absolutely riding the wave of the interest amongst consumers for a different kind of product. They operate in America. I think it's time that something similar started in South Africa to enable people to find those responsible tourism businesses. And that's something, Michael, I see you nodding. That might be something that we talk about, because I think it would be a really good idea to actually create a commercial incentive for businesses to meet some basic criteria to join a responsible travel portal. But just look at, this is booking.com, for goodness sake. This is not some trendy left-wing community-based organization. They are regarded by many as sharks over the level of commission that they charge for bookings, but they're still at the top of the league tables. Displaced Expedia. They're being chased now by people who are doing direct bookings because consumers are wanting to change. But Booking.com's own research just last year, 83% of global travelers, this is not just British travelers, and they've got it by source market. And in some source market, particularly the BRICS countries, particularly China actually and Brazil, numbers are even higher. 83% regard sustainable travel as essential. 61% say the pandemic's made them want it more. But look further down, 49% still believe that there aren't enough sustainable tourism products in the marketplace. And that's the thing which Booking.com has been saying now for 4 or 5 years. Where are you in terms of putting your sustainability credentials out there in public? And there's still a reluctance to do that. Mike, do you have any idea why people are so reluctant to talk about it? Because when we did the work, I did work with the Association of Independent Tour Operators, and we found they were doing lots of good things. They weren't talking about it.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of why that is?
You know, I think we've had this debate, I remember many years ago, but, you know, when we go on holiday, we don't want to be so responsible, you know. It's a very serious sort of concept. So it's also the way that it's being packaged to people. Enjoyment while leaving the best behind and having the best impact. And we need to find the right communication channels. For me, it's a lot about communication and the way that we tell the story and about the storytelling. I keep on referring, but I want to refer to Mike Lutzaya this morning. He was telling us a story. He was telling us an interesting, very an enthusing story. And I think that's one way we need to look at it. The other, I think, is that, you know, there's a boring side to tourism management, and that is market research and statistics. And I think we often don't invest enough in really researching and segmenting the market. If we, in most of the projects that we do proper market research, and especially in the travel trade. And when we do that, segmentation of exploratory travel, for example, niche market developments, special interest markets, people who are looking much more into these concepts are coming out stronger and stronger in the marketplace. So there are new interests developing, and we don't always know enough about it, I think, especially from a destination marketing perspective, but also from a business marketing perspective. So I think there are a number of sides to this. It's a communication thing, the way we phrase it, the way we talk about it, you know, responsible travel. Oh, I need to go on this, you know, responsible holiday. That's not why people go on holiday. They want to relax, they want to have fun. And I think we need to bring the fun back into concepts of sustainability. And I think the notion that, you know, I remember when I worked here in the tourism board, we had a program, a tourism schools program in the Western Cape. It was funded actually by MTN at that stage, a company completely outside of tourism. And we had something like 250 schools in that program. And it was a fun thing because we communicated to the children fun concepts in tourism, but with an underlying theme of sustainability and responsibility. So maybe there are ways that we also need to look at it from getting the right sort of communication expertise on board.
I think that's absolutely right, Mike. But one of the things that was interesting about Justin Francis is that before he came to do the master's course with me, he was head of worldwide marketing for the Body Shop. Now, the reason the Body Shop was so successful was it took the guilt out of cosmetics for women and for men now. But they took the guilt out, and the consumers didn't want to have to worry about whether the thing had been tested on animals. They wanted to go to a shop where they could be sure that nothing in that shop had been tested on animals. Exactly. And I think that's the point. We don't want, when we go on holiday, to have to work out what's responsible. We want to be able to trust the supplier to have done that work for us. So we don't want a supplier who's going to sell us. It was very quickly how quickly people walked away from swimming with dolphins, because the brands realized that was brand damage for them if they sold swimming with dolphins. Yeah. The same thing has happened with elephant back riding. You can almost do that nowhere in the world now, because it's gone around the world like wildfire because people didn't want to feel guilty. And I think that we need to remember that. You know, people will remember you if you sold them something that makes them feel guilty. And Mike, the other thing we need to remember, that in the hotels, responsibility started in the spas. It started with that most luxurious of all experiences where people did not want to feel guilty afterwards. Yeah. It's partly the work of Anita Roddick, but it was also the consumer's desire not to feel guilty after they'd had the indulgence of a spa. And I think that's where it needs to go.
Feeling good, you know, I want to say, almost turning, not only just feeling guilty, but feeling so good about what I've done, you know. And when people leave something good behind and having had a holiday, it's such an emotional thing to be on a holiday, you know. It's something you remember forever. And if you can go away feeling good at another level, and I think if we can get that built in. I want just quickly touch on another issue.
Sure.
With working on various master plans and planning strategies and so on in Africa, one of the areas where I think there's a lot of investment required is in skills development. The value chains of tourism are fairly confined. And in Cape Town, for example, I think that in cities like Cape Town, Barcelona, and so on, the supply chains are right there. And so tourism, the knock-on effect of tourism is quite substantial. And I think when you measure it, irrespective of whether we call it responsible tourism or whatever, there's a lot that remains within the economy. In many other developing destinations, the challenge is providing in the supply the kind of quality and the amounts. I heard this morning someone say that they had this basket weaving project, but they couldn't produce adequate number or volumes of baskets to service the market. And I think that's one area where, again, I'm coming back to a combination of private and public sector, but it's really investing in skills beyond the core value chain of tourism, you know, and that's where I think often destinations fail to make it. If I look at many of the destinations where I've worked, yes, the policy might be there, and you spoke about lack of implementation. It's just the reality of having to import things into the economy because it just cannot, the skills aren't there to provide it locally. So I think that is another issue that needs to be built into our responsible tourism policy, sustainability, capacitating people, you know, in the right type of skills, and to know that you don't have to work in the hotel to be in tourism. There are many other jobs.
Michael, it's interesting that you mentioned baskets. Peter Nazette and I did some work around Windy National Park in Uganda, and all we did was to get a Ugandan artist from Kampala to come and work with the local basket makers. They changed the designs significantly. They changed the quality in a small way. Peter got a phone call from Uganda to say they couldn't keep the products on the shelves. And it was Peter who had to say to them, well, put the price up.
Yeah.
Because they were now creating something of such value to the consumer that they were increasing their earnings. It did take a little longer to make the better quality baskets, but they were making a much better living. And we don't do enough of that kind of work, particularly with craft producers, whether in the cities or in rural areas. Yeah. And those are easy wins. You don't need international consultants
they
to do that.
They could be easy wins, you know, and I think the lifestyle changes that we're seeing nowadays towards organic eating and so on, you know, those are skills that agriculturally people in many of the rural destinations, it's agriculture based. So teaching people the skills of organic production, for example, and producing enough organic you know, fresh produce, for example, that's just one quick way of really churning out, and it's a high value thing, you know, it's a high value clientele, and it's something to really capitalize on. The basket weaving, there are so many other areas where one can do that.
Does anyone have a burning question or wish to disagree with Mike and I? It'd be quite understandable if you did.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if I could just wrap up then, Mike, and I'll give you the last word, I promise. The point I wanted to make is that when we develop responsible tourism, it was never meant to be used with consumers. The fact that Justin made it work with consumers is something I know I could never have done. You needed somebody with Justin's marketing skills to do that. But there's no reason to get uptight about the word responsible or even to use it in your marketing. It doesn't matter what it's called. What matters is the product and the experience that you deliver. And Justin is famous for saying in the classroom on one occasion that he couldn't understand why I hope Lisa's not here actually, but couldn't understand why fairly traded coffee was any better than any other kind of coffee, because you can't taste the difference. And certainly I can't taste the difference. I buy fairly traded coffee out of commitment, not because I can taste the difference. But with a responsible holiday, you can tell the difference. It's certainly different when you go to Group Boss or when you go and stay with any other responsible tour operator or accommodation. You can feel the difference. And we should be talking about the difference, not the responsibility. Mike, you have the last word.
Yeah, thank you. Harold, I want to also honor you at this occasion. You've really stuck at the journey, and you know my company is called The Journey, and the reason why it's called The Journey is because tourism management is a journey, and responsible tourism is a journey. You know, it's not something that will start today and end today. I want to put the challenge out there. I see Salifo Sido here, I see Kwachi here, people who work in Africa and in Southern Africa environment. They're in the policy environment. Africa, and I want to say at least Southern Africa, should be the sustainable brand of tourism in the world. It's an opportunity. It's a huge opportunity. I think we should really drive hard, you know, in bringing this up in decision-making circles, in political circles, talking the language and framing a kind of language and terminology and communication system that communicates what we're talking about without making it too serious, without making it too responsible, but making it something that leaves behind the best, make people feel good and being the right thing to do. So guys, you're there. We are the old beards, you know. It's time for a new generation. Who's here, guys? Come on. It's time for a new generation to pick this up and to move with it. So we're watching you. I'm sure Harold is also there to support wherever possible. But I'm looking forward to the next 10, 20 years and to see where this is going. So thanks very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure, Mike.
Thank you.
I would just say that I turned 70 this year, and I'm hoping to live a few more years, but I would like to see a bit more progress before I go to wherever I'm going next. The next panel in here is something I have never done before and may never do again. For the first time ever, I've chosen to have a panel where one business presents what it does across the whole range of responsible tourism. I'm doing it because the V&A Waterfront for years have been pioneers in this. They're not very far away from where they are. They've won one award after another, and many of you will know that just in November at World Travel Market, they won the Global Award for their work on sustainability. And I really wanted to honor what they've achieved by giving them this platform today. So at 12:45, they will be talking about why they do it and what they do at the V&A Waterfront. I don't think I'm going to do this again for some time because it's rare that you come across a business with such diversity and such scale, almost, in my view, a destination in their own right within Cape Town. But it will be fascinating to hear what they have to say in a few minutes' time. But thank you for being here, and thanks for listening to Mike and I.